Night settled over the Hornburg like a closing fist. The mountains loomed as black sentinels, their peaks lost to storm and thunder, while rain scoured the stones of Helms deep, as if the world itself sought to wash the valley clean. Torches guttered along the battlements, their flames bending low beneath the wind, casting uneasy light across rows of waiting faces. Men of Rohan and elves of Lorien stood shoulder to shoulder upon the deeping wall. Two kindreds, long sundered by years and grief, joined once more beneath shadow and storm. Among them walked legends made flesh. King Theoden, weary yet unbowed, surveyed the fortress of his forefathers. Aragorn, son of Arathorn, stood vigilant, eyes fixed beyond the wall, as though he could already feel the weight of history pressing upon that night. Legolas of the Woodland Realm and Gimli, son of Gloin, stood side by side, each ready to die fighting beside a friend. Then, beneath the storm, another presence made itself known. From the open plain came a sound, first mistaken for thunder. Footsteps, thousands of them, striking the earth in perfect unison. Lightning revealed them in fragments at first. The Uruk Hai advanced, rank upon rank, armor black with water, faces dark and scarred, eyes fixed upon the wall with pitiless intent. With each flash, their numbers grew, stretching ever farther into the darkness, until the valley itself seemed to breathe with them. They did not shout, they did not waver. Bred for war and stripped of fear, Saruman's army marched as one living engine of destruction toward the ancient walls of the Hornburg, come at last to break the fortress that guarded Helms deep. Above them, men of Rohan and elves of Lorien stood in silence. Hands rested upon strings, shoulders hunched beneath cloaks heavy with rain. Breaths were slow, controlled. Aragorn walked the length of the wall, eyes measuring distance and density, listening not to the storm, but to the space between heartbeats. He waited for the moment when patience must give way to fire. Below, the Uruk Hai stopped. Thousands stood motionless beneath the downpour, shields raised, spears grounded, a living wall of iron and flesh. Their discipline was absolute. They did not shout, they did not jeer, they simply waited, daring the wall to blink first. Lightning split the sky. For an instant, Isengard's full might was revealed in stark white clarity. Helms gleaming, blades bare, rain streaming down armor like oil. The field was silent save for the storm. Even the thunder seemed to hesitate. Aragorn lifted his hand. Along the wall, bows were drawn as one. Wood creaked under strain, strings tightened. The sound rolled down the battlements like a single, drawn breath. And then, an old man's hands began to tremble. Rain beaded along his fingers. His grip slipped. The bowstring snapped free. The arrow found its mark, and Uruk at the front collapsed into the mud with a wet, final sound, armor sinking into the earth as blood mingled with rain. For one heartbeat, the world held still. Then the Uruk commander threw back his head and screamed. It was a sound torn from the depths of Isengard, guttural, savage, unchained. Fury surged through the host like wildfire. Shields slammed together. Blades rose. The Uruk Hai roared and surged forward as one, the ground trembling beneath their charge. High upon the wall, King Theoden watched the tide finally break.
Now it begins.
And the long night of Helm's Deep was unleashed. Arrows flew from the deeping wall in relentless waves. Elven shafts struck with merciless precision, cutting down Uruk Hai by the dozens. Bodies crashed into the mud below, yet the fallen only served as footing for those who followed. Ladders slammed against the stone. Iron hooks bit deep as the Uruk Hai began their ascent. Shields locked overhead against the rain of arrows. They climbed through death without hesitation, driven by discipline and hatred rather than fear. The first Uruks crested the parapet. Steel met steel atop the wall. Shields shattered, blades rang. The narrow stone became a killing ground, slick with rain and blood. Aragorn stood at the fore, sword flashing as he cut down foes and hurled them screaming into the darkness below. Gimli roared with savage joy, his axe rising and falling in brutal arcs, each blow final. Legolas fired without pause, arrows finding eyes and throats until he cast aside his bow and drew his blade, moving like a living shadow among the press. Still they came. Uruk Hai spilled onto the wall in disciplined waves, heedless of the dead beneath their feet. Men slipped on rain-slick stone and were lost to the abyss, while others stepped forward to take their place. Yet the wall held. For every Uruk that gained the parapet, another was cast down. High above the clash, King Theoden looked upon the struggle and cried out in defiance.
Is this all you can muster, Saruman?
From the depths of the storm, the Battering Ram emerged, vast, iron-shod, its timber frame slick with rain. Uruk Hai heaved and shoved it forward up the causeway, boots digging into stone as arrows hammered into the press. The ram ground onward toward the Hornburg gate. Every yard gained, bought with lives that meant nothing to Isengard. The ram struck. The gates shuddered. Timber groaned. Stone trembled again. And again. Inside the fortress, defenders braced themselves, shields locked, listening to each thunderous blow echo through the ancient halls. Below them, the fighting on the wall turned desperate as the Uruk Hai gained ground. Then a single figure broke through the ranks below. An Uruk Hai, bearing a torch, charged toward the deeping wall. Arrows struck him, pierced his flesh, yet he did not fall. Screaming defiance, he ran through fire and rain toward the culvert at the base of the wall. Shouts rose, too late. The explosion tore the deeping wall apart in a roar that shook the mountains as the wall collapsed into ruin, leaving a gaping wound where once stood the pride of Rohan. Helm's Deep was breached. The shattered wall vomited fire and smoke as the Uruk Hai spilled through the breach in a screaming black tide, climbing over broken stone and burning wreckage, boots pounding through the ruin of the deeping wall. For the first time, their fury was unleashed, no longer held by discipline alone, but driven by the scent of blood and victory. Below the breach, Aragorn rallied a line of elves. Loose! Arrows flashed downward into the press. The first wave of Uruk Hai was cut apart, bodies tumbling back into the rubble, but there were too many. The gap filled as fast as it was emptied, ranks pouring through without pause. Aragorn did not hesitate. The elves surged forward, blades drawn, crashing into the Uruk Hai beneath the ruined wall. steel collided in a thunderous clash as the fight descended into brutal close-quarters slaughter within the deeping wall itself. Then the Hornburg gate erupted. The battering ram smashed through in a storm of splintered timber. Uruk Hai flooded the inner court, roaring as they fanned out through the fortress. Men of Rohan, joined by scattered elves, formed desperate lines, shields locking, as they fought to buy moments where minutes no longer existed. Every step back was paid for in blood. At last, the call was given. The defenders began to fall back toward the keep, fighting as they went, refusing to break even as the Hornburg was swallowed behind them. Helms Deep was lost. Only the keep still stood. The doors of the keep closed behind the last defenders. Outside, the Uruk Hai howled in triumph, their shadows dancing across the stone. The air was thick with smoke and defeat. Inside, King Theoden felt the weight of loss settle over him. The Hornburg was no longer a fortress, but a tomb in waiting. For a moment he stood as the last of a dying line. The burden of a realm pressed into his chest. Then the darkness shifted. The first light of dawn slipped through the window. "Look for my coming at first light on the 5th day." The words struck through the despair like a blade. Theoden straightened. He drew his sword, and his voice rang through the keep with the authority of a king who refused to yield.
The Horn of Helm Hammerhand shall sound in the deep one last time.
Atop the tallest tower, Gimli gripped the ancient horn and blew with all the strength left in him, the sound rolling outward like thunder reborn. Theoden rode first, his face set like stone. Aragorn followed, hooves pounding as they thundered down the causeway. Cutting a path through the darkness, spears shattered, helmets split. The air filled with the wet sound of bodies hitting stone. They reached the bottom of the causeway, and the Uruk Hai pressed in from every side, as pikes and shields began to close around them. Then the eastern ridge brightened. Light spilled over the gorge, and on the rim stood a figure in white, Gandalf the White, his sword, Glamdring, held high. Beside him, Eomer appeared with the Rohirrim reinforcements, a mass of horse and steel shining in the dawn. The Uruk Hai regrouped, forming a shield wall, pikes rising like a forest of iron. Gandalf lifted his hand. The Rohirrim charged. They thundered down the slope like a living avalanche, horses screaming, swords raised. The Uruk Hai braced their pikes and shields, but the Rohirrim hit them like a wave of iron. Horses reared, riders slammed into the line, and the air filled with the screams of the dying. Spears splintered, shields buckled, and for every Uruk that held, 2 fell. Saruman's line of steel shuddered, then fractured, until the Uruk Hai finally broke. They fled screaming into the trees, and the host of Isengard was shattered. The rain had stopped, but the battle had not yet finished echoing. The field beyond the Hornburg was littered with the dead. Uruk Hai fallen in twisted ranks, their black armor slick with blood and mud, bodies strewn like broken stones across the ground. Yet the air was not still. It was filled with the sounds of survival, cheers rising, swords raised, boots pounding as the living reclaimed the ruins. men of Rohan lifted their voices into the dawn, a raw chorus of relief and fury. They shouted, they embraced, they fell to their knees and laughed through tears. This victory had been bought with blood, and they felt every drop. King Theoden raised his sword high, eyes burning with hard-won pride. Aragorn stood beside him, shoulders squared, gaze already scanning the horizon for the next threat. Legolas and Gimli shared a silent look, a vow sealed in the midst of victory. And on the ridge, Gandalf lifted his blade, a quiet gesture of approval, as if to say the night had ended. For now. The battle for Helm's Deep was over. But the battle for Middle-earth was just beginning.